Back when I was a kid, I played Mafia 2 like crazy. It was one of my favorite games of all time. I loved it dearly. I loved the story. It was one of the first video game stories that actually made me cry as a kid. I couldn't get enough of it. Although back then, I did not get the platinum trophy for it when it was on PS3. I played it a little bit as much as I could, but I never really put all the time into it to finish out the platinum trophy hunt. I played the game, I finished the game, but never went the extra mile. This time, now that it's got a definitive edition that you can play on both PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, I decided to go back, play it again, and get the platinum trophy this time since it is one of my favorite games. Now, for full transparency, because it is one of my favorite games of all time, I did end up playing it during the initial release back in 2020. So I earned about 11 trophies whenever I first played. I'll go ahead and show them on screen now. That way you can actually see where I stopped back in 2020. If you want to go ahead and pause the video now so you can read up and see where I was, go ahead and do that now. According to PSN profiles, this game is a 6 out of 10 difficulty. Takes about 2 playthroughs. Technically, I ended up doing it in 1, but we'll get to that in a second. And should take you about 26 hours. It took me a little bit longer than that, but that's mostly due to the fact that the game kept breaking on me. Almost every day I'd have at least 5 different crashes on this game. So it took a little bit longer than 26 hours, but nonetheless, we got it done. In order to get this platinum trophy, I had to split it up into 3 different parts. 1, I had to do the game on the hardest difficulty, hard difficulty, which luckily was nowhere near as difficult as Mafia 1's classic difficulty. 2, I had to do all miscellaneous trophies throughout my playthrough, which sadly I had to go and clean up every once in a while in the 3rd phase. But 3, I had to go and do collectibles, which took quite some time, and also had to do a couple cleanups with some missable trophies near the end of the game. As I said before, due to all the crashes that I had to endure during my playthrough, it took a lot longer than it should have, which honestly I should have had this video up 2 months ago. But now that it is done, and now that I can have it up, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. In Chapter 1, we meet Vito Scaletta, an Italian immigrant who ventured over to Empire Bay with his family as a baby. Growing up poor, Vito knows that he must do whatever he can to get himself and his family out of poverty. After getting caught robbing a store with his childhood best friend, Joe Barbaro, Vito gets shipped off to the military during World War II and is tasked in helping with the siege of a Sicilian town hall, where Vito gets his first taste of how much power a mob boss truly has when the Sicilian Don stops the firefight in the middle of the city. After being discharged after sustaining a small injury, Vito is picked up by Joe at a train station before having a few beers while Joe arranges for Vito's long-term release, and he later leaves to let his family know that he's finally home. While at home, Vito learns that his father owed a large amount of money to a loan shark that he was unable to pay back before he died. So Vito asks Joe where he can make a large amount of money as fast as possible to help out his family. Joe tells him that he has a hookup for a job, and that it would be a good start to get some cash. After Vito's mother gets onto him for not earning honest money, Vito reaches out to Joe for help when looking for honest work. Joe tells Vito to go to the docks to meet a man by the name of Derek, who offers Vito a job doing some handiwork. Fed up with hard work and low pay, Vito offers Derek the opportunity to use him as some muscle, which Derek obliges and commands Vito to go collect the money that is owed to the barber and is offered a small cut for his troubles. After collecting the money for Derek and collecting his cut, Vito then meets up with Joe and Henry at the Maltese Falcon to discuss a job involving stealing almost expired oil ration stamps that you must sell before midnight in order to earn the trophy Mailman. As long as you have a nice fast car, one of the cars you get from the definitive edition of the game, it'll be fairly easy, even on the hardest difficulty. In the beginning of Chapter 4, you ask to meet Joe and Henry at the Falcon to do another job. Henry tells you about a jewelry store connected to the local mall that Vito and Joe rob in the middle of the night. While we are robbing the store, we run into the Irish mob, who are also hoping for a big score, and must shoot our way out of the jewelry store with the Irish mob and the cops. After escaping the hail of bullets, we drive back to Joe's to end the night. Vito meets up with Joe, Henry, and Luca at the bar to discuss another job. They are told to kill an enemy of the family, but before they do that, they must pick up an MG42 from Henry's army surplus store. The planned ambush goes wrong as the fat man runs away, so we must chase him through a parking garage and kill him to finish the job. While we are working our way through the parking garage to get our mark, I managed to finally bag 50 kills to earn myself the trophy, the Enforcer. Eventually, we put an end to the fat man and must take an injured Henry to El Greco, the trusted Mafia doctor, to patch up Henry's wounds. After earning enough money, Vito takes some money to Frankie to pay off his father's debts. The morning following the assassination of the fat man, a small group of cops await Vito right outside of Joe's apartment and proceed to arrest him for the distribution of the stolen oil ration cards in Chapter 3. Vito is later sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. As Vito arrives, he runs into one of the Irish mobsters that was involved in the shootout in the jewelry store, named Brian O'Neill. Rather upset with being caught for the robbery thanks to Vito, Brian starts a fight with you that you will in fact lose, resulting in both Vito and Brian to spend a few days in the hole. Impressed with Vito's performance, an older man by the name of Leo Galante approaches Vito after his time in the hole to ask if he would like to take part in prison bouts on his behalf. After a little bit of training and thought, Vito takes Leo up on his offer and starts to fight on his behalf. Near the end of the chapter, Vito's sister Frankie stops by the prison to visit her brother and inform him that their mother had become very sick and that it was not looking good. After a few cutscenes, we learn that Vito's mother had succumbed to her illness and passed away. After several years in prison and some pushing of some paperwork, Vito is released from prison and picked up by Joe and brought to Joe's apartment. Seemed to have a few upgrades from the last time that we were there. To celebrate Vito's release from prison, both Vito and Joe meet up with Eddie at a brothel to get drunk and have some fun. After Eddie has had clearly too much to drink, Eddie asks Vito if he could drive him home. After being in the car for several minutes, the boys start to notice a stench coming from the back of the car, later prompting Eddie to reveal to Joe and Vito that he had to take care of some business beforehand. So now they all have to pull over to a wooded area near the old observatory and bury a body. In need of money, Vito gets up the next day to join Joe on a small sales job selling off cigarettes that they had stolen from a shipment. Just as they were finishing up selling all of their product, a gang of greasers showed up to the place where Joe and Vito were selling their cartons. Hurling around a lot of threats at Joe and Vito, the greasers made it pretty clear that they did not like it when others encroached on their turf. After popping one of the greasers, Joe and Vito must escape after blowing up the truck with the cartons of cigarettes. Joe and Vito meet up with Eddie once again after they hear of where the greasers typically hang out, leading them to run over to their hideout to wreak as much havoc as possible before stealing a couple of hot rods as lost payment for messing with their sales. In the early morning, Vito wakes up to his phone ringing, and when he answers, he hears Eddie on the other end. He asks Vito to meet him and someone else over at the bar for a talk about a job. Once we reach the bar, we learn the truth about our arrest. Major mob boss Carlo Falcone tells us that Luca set Vito up and he was the reason we spent nearly a decade behind bars. Carlo tells Vito of a slaughterhouse that Luca owns and asks us to follow him and kill him. After we take out Luca and his boys, Vito and Joe become a part of the Falcone family. While driving around the city, I stopped by a suit store to pick up my first luxury suit and pop the trophy, Sharp Suitor. During this chapter, Joe and Vito are asked to do the biggest job yet, kill Roberto Clemente. By killing Clemente, this leaves all the power to Carlo Falcone. Joe, almost surprisingly, has the idea of disguising ourselves as a window cleaners, allowing us to sneak through the conference room and plant an explosive where Clemente will be holding a meeting. We ask young Marty, who we met earlier in the game, to be our getaway driver. Once we plant the explosives, we make our way to the roof and ready ourselves for detonation. Once we blow up the conference room, we check the aftermath to be sure that Clemente was in fact dead. Sadly for Vito and Joe, Clemente had used the bathroom at just the right moment, saving him from the blast, forcing us to track him down in the building and gun him down ourselves. After hearing the commotion from upstairs, Clemente's men take no chance after seeing Marty still waiting in the garage and decide to take him out before he could do anything. After killing Clemente, Joe is immediately inconsolable for convincing him to come in the first place. Haunted by his decisions, Joe gets uncontrollably drunk at a bar and begins to wave his gun around. Concerned with his own safety and the safety of his patrons, the barkeep calls Vito to come collect Joe. After Vito arrives, Joe continues to wave his gun around, and while he was doing so, ends up slamming his gun hand on the table in frustration, causing the gun to go off and strike the bartender in the head. Afraid that Joe would go to jail as a result, Vito must grab the body and bury it, earning us the trophy, Hey Joe. While traveling from point A to point B in my Samson Drifter, I earned the trophy, Pedal to the Metal, for traveling at 125 miles per hour. In Chapter 11, Vito wakes up to Henry at his door, asking if they could go for a drive. Vito obliges, and they drive their way over to the Maltese Falcon. Henry asks Vito if he can put in a good word for him with Falcone and get him a job now that Clemente is dead. Vito says that he will see what he can do and talk to the Don. Once they arrive, the Don says that he would give Henry a shot solely on Vito's recommendation. Feeling threatened with Leo Galante's involvement in the city and organized crime, Eddie asks Henry to kill him on behalf of Don Falcone. Henry accepts and makes his way over to Leo's, obviously scared for Leo's safety, to Leo's house in order to save Leo's life. Now, this chapter does have a missable trophy, wherein you have to sneak Leo out of his house without being seen by Henry. Don't worry though, if you don't do this the first time around, it does not affect the remainder of the game, and you'll have to do the chapter again like I did in order to earn it. I will go ahead and pop the trophy here though, to show that I had earned it. We then drive Leo over to the airport so that he can leave and live out the rest of his days in a new city. After a long day, Vito goes back to his house to call it a day, only to be woken up in the middle of the night by the Irish mob tossing Molotovs into his house in retaliation for the death of Brian O'Neill. After rushing over to Joe's house and telling him what the Irish have done, Joe thought it was time to get some quick revenge. After tracking the mobsters down to their usual hideout and having a small shootout, we kill all of those who burned down Vito's house. Now that you no longer have a place to live, Joe hands you Marty's old apartment keys so you can crash there for the time being. After the crazy night that Vito had, Vito is in need of some major money. Luckily for him, Henry comes to Vito with a job and asks him to take him to the park. Henry proposes the idea of getting $35,000 from a loan shark to then turn around and use that money to purchase drugs to flip for some major cash. Thankfully, the loan shark agrees and we grab large amounts of drugs to then flip. We soon learn that all of this was a major setup and are approached by a group of guys who are dressed up as cops, hoping to steal our stash. After a quick shootout, we recover our stash and make a few drops for large amounts of cash. Vito wakes up from a frantic call from Henry explaining that there was something wrong with the deal and that they needed to meet back up at the park in order to discuss their next steps. As Joe and Vito arrive at the park, they witness Henry being killed and sliced up by a bunch of members of the Triad gang. After Joe instinctually kills a few Triads at the park, the boss of the Triads escapes the park with a few standing members. Joe and Vito then follow the boss to his restaurant in Chinatown and decide that it is time for an ambush. After making our way through the restaurant, Vito and Joe barge their way into the boss's office, where we meet the leader of the Chinese Triads, Zayun Wong. Obviously upset, the boys start to demand answers while pressing their guns to the head of the mob boss. Mr. Wong informs Joe and Vito that Henry was a rat and he was working for the feds. Both Joe and Vito did not want to believe the words that were coming out of his mouth, as Henry had grown close with Joe and Vito, and it did not feel like it would be something that he would do. Rather upset by the new information, Joe decides to put a couple bullets in the head of the mob boss, unleashing a war across the powerful families. This chapter is exactly where the game starts to ramp up the difficulty. It was nowhere near as hard as the classic difficulty on Mafia 1, but even up to this point, the game wasn't that difficult. I really hadn't died that many times, and all through all 13 chapters, I maybe died like 30 times. But you will see here pretty soon that the death toll ramps up real fast. After Henry's death and the money being stolen by the Triads, it is pretty evident that Joe and Vito need money very quickly in order to pay back the loan shark Bruno and not cause more problems for themselves. Joe and Vito are asked to carry out a quick assassination of an old man in a neighborhood on behalf of another family from a different city. We soon learn that their target is the protagonist from our last video, Tommy Angelo. The job goes over quite easily, and we pocket the money that was given to us ahead of time. This pops the trophy the Mafia never forgets. Realizing that they need a lot more money, Joe and Vito split looking for more work. Hoping for another job, Vito goes back to the docks to see if Derek needs any more help. Derek tells us that he's having some issues with some of his employees not wanting to work and threatening to go on strike after they say that Derek is mistreating his employees and even fired one for getting injured on the job. This is also where we learn that Derek is the one that killed Vito's father, causing him to feel a bitter rage. With a little help from the dock workers, we make our way through the dockyard to kill both Derek and Steve, along with their loyal henchmen. After they are taken care of, we steal the money from Derek's office, pushing us closer to the total amount that we need for Bruno. After killing both Derek and Steve, we earn the trophy Out for Justice. After upgrading a car to its full level in the game, I earned the trophy Dream Handling. If you rob 5 stores in under 5 minutes, you will end up popping the trophy Stuck Up. If you bring 5 vehicles to Mike's Scrapyard, you'll end up getting the trophy Proper Scrapper. I later popped the trophy for completing Chapter 14. Oh boy. What can I say about Chapter 15? This is the final chapter in the game. This is when everything comes to head. This chapter was something else. I died so many times for no reason. It almost felt like I was paper mache. It felt like my bullets were useless. I had shot so many bullets at so many people, but the second that I got hit by 2 or 3 bullets, I was dead. You'll even notice that somewhere near where my face cam is, that there is a death counter. That death counter goes from 30 to 100 really fast. That is all because of this one chapter. Out of nowhere. I don't know why. But it took quite some time, and it didn't help that the game kept crashing at this exact moment. So I had to keep doing the chapter over and over and over again. Boy, oh boy, was I happy to finally get it done. Now, let's go ahead and talk about what happens in this chapter. I got the trophy Hairdresser for getting 5 headshots in rapid succession. In the final chapter of this game, Vito gets a phone call from Eddie to meet Don Carlo at the old observatory. As Vito is making his way down, he is interrupted by Leo Galante and asked to get in his car. Leo informs him that Falcone must die. This is all due to what Joe and Vito did by starting an all-out mob war, so this is the only way to stay alive. After hearing Leo out, Vito agrees that this is his only way to freedom and begins to make his way to the observatory. Falcone's men are eagerly awaiting Vito's arrival with guns in their hands and ready to leave Vito to his death. Unwilling to die and ready to live up to his promises, Vito takes out the 2 men who greet him, which begins the last shootout of the game. As I said previously, after about 70 deaths and a lot of frustrations, we finally kill Carmine Falcone and finish what we started. Once Falcone is dead, Leo greets us outside of the observatory to thank us for doing as we were told. Leo once again asks us to get in the car, this time requesting Joe to enter a different one. After we talk to Leo for a little while, we notice that the car that Joe was in is going in a different direction than we are, and that is when Leo informs us that Joe is not part of the previous deal that we discussed on the way to the observatory. After this final cutscene, we pop all remaining story and difficulty trophies. Damn. Tough nut. That was for hard, right? Yeah. And made man. Finish the story on medium difficulty or high, right? And finish it. Perfect start. Now we have made it to our final portion of the video, the cleanup portion of the video. Most of this was just collectibles and miscellaneous cleanup. Now that the main trophies are done, we get a trophy, A Great Gentleman, for helping a woman with her broken down car in Chapter 2. Again, I had to go back and clean this up because I forgot about it whenever I initially played the game. You earn the trophy, The Professional, for stealing the ration stamps without raising the alarm in Chapter 3. For some reason, during Chapter 3, I was trying to blow through it to get through the game pretty quickly and totally forgot about this silent alarm that I had to go and get in the basement. At some point, while I was roaming around the city of Empire Bay, I ended up earning the trophy Knucklehead for killing a total of 30 enemies using melee attacks only. If you go back to Chapter 10 and Chapter Select, you can do the rest of the miscellaneous trophies, as the chapter is not entirely linear. After selecting Chapter 10, I went ahead and sold 5 luxury cars to Derek at the docks. In order to do this, I just kept visiting the same parking lot that spawns the higher end vehicles that you need for this trophy. There's only a select number of ones that you can actually do. They're all on a list in the trophy guide, so that can actually help you to look for the ones you need. As you're going around picking up cars, by cycling through cars in your garage, you pick up the trophy Petrol Head. While driving around, you can toggle a safe driver mode that keeps the car from going over 30 miles an hour while you drive to earn the trophy Cruise Control. Near the end of this Chapter 10's Chapter Select portion, I went ahead and got the trophy Hard to Kill. This is a more time-consuming trophy, But all you have to really do is kind of just go to a bar, block off the doors, start shooting, and have the cop shoot at you for about 10 minutes. The best thing for you to do, at least to get them to keep shooting at you, is to basically pop up with your gun and have them think that you're going to keep shooting. Do this, sit there, wait for it to pop, and you'll be good to go. Lastly, I had to find all the collectibles available for Mafia 2. The first set of collectibles that I had to find were the wanted posters that were scattered around the map. Just like the other miscellaneous trophies that I grabbed, it is best to do this in Chapter 10. You may want to put on a video, some music, or a podcast while you do this because it's going to be a long grind to find them all. Luckily, there are 2 videos that are actually inside the PSN Profiles trophy guide that help you get these wanted posters. And just throw that on and follow the guide. It's not that hard, it just takes a lot of time. So while I've been editing this video, I actually just realized that I do not have the footage for the trophy One Careful Owner, which is what you earn whenever you travel a total of 50 miles in one vehicle. Sorry, but it is what it is. I did earn it though. Now that I've gotten all the wanted posters from Mafia 2, it is time to do the last bit of the cleanup and the Platinum Trophy grind by going through Chapter Select to pick up the last of the Playboy magazines. I obviously cannot show you these on YouTube or else I'll get in a lot of big trouble, but I'll go ahead and show the trophy pop and the trophy pop for the Platinum Trophy.